Hi everyone, my name is Kristin Hayes and I'm an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator, and today I'm going to show you how to make this beautiful Thanksgiving card with all the nice fall colors and some copper heat embossing. So to start with, we're going to use a piece of early espresso, and it's cut at 8.5 by 4 by 5.5 and scored at 4 1/4. Our next piece to layer on is just a piece of copper foil, and that's cut at 5 3/8 by 4 1/8. Our next piece here is actually stamped on, and I'm going to show you in a minute, and that's a piece of pumpkin pie. And we're going to start by making this plaid background. So we're going to start, I have my Stamparatus all set up, and I have the piece of pumpkin pie cut bigger than we need it, just because it makes it a little bit easier when using a background stamp to go back and forth. I just want to caution you, you can see I have a broken magnet. When you're using the Stamparatus, you never want your magnets to be close together, because if they do come together, they will crack. So I say that all the time, and then I was the one that cracked my own magnets. So we're going to start, and let me see if I can move this a little bit easier into frame. So you can see I positioned the paper and the magnet so I can go back and forth with this buffalo check background stamp as many times as I want. So we're going to start with the Cajun Craze, and we're going to ink up our background stamp. And normally when I'm stamping a background stamp, I'm so careful to make sure it's all covered exactly evenly. But with the Stamparatus, if I miss a spot, I can just go right back. So I'm not as paranoid over making sure everything is perfect the first time. So I'm just gently pressing on my Stamparatus and then lifting up, and you can see I didn't get over here quite as well as I should, and I would like some better saturation with the Cajun Craze. So I'm just going to ink it up again. And then press maybe a little bit harder around the edges than I did the first time. And I really do this on the sample I've made. I did this about 3 or 4 times just to get it just the way I wanted. And I don't need a solid block necessarily, but I do want to make sure the edges are nice and crisp and that we have a deep color. And as you can see, going back and forth with the magnets, the paper just stays in place, so you can do this as many times as you would need to, or as many times as you want. If you were happy with the way it's stamped the first time, that's great and you're all set. I'm going to do it one more time, and then I should be all set. Okay, just press, and there we go. And that's perfect for the way I would like it. So I'm going to take this piece out, and I'm just going to place the Stamparatus to the side. I just want to remind you when you're, I will clean the stamp off later, but when you're storing your Stamparatus, you never want to store it with the plates in the hinges because they can crack. So you just want to take them off. All right, so we're going to bring that back into the frame, and now I wanted to make it look a little bit plaid. So you can certainly use a ruler, but I like to use just the edge of the blender pen box to make my lines. I'm going to start with the early espresso, and I'm going to start the Stampin' Right marker, and I'm going to start with the thinner or the journaling end. And I'm just going to come in a little bit and go up and down to make a thin line. We'll cut that part off because I moved the blends. And you can, like I said, use a ruler here. Don't worry if it's not exactly the same on each one. No one is going to notice. Or go through and make sure your plaid looks exactly right. So you can do this with really any colors. I love doing it with just red and black and on white, on Whisper White. So we've done all the lines that way, so we're just going to turn it this way, and we're going to come in again. We're staying to the left of this column. We're just coming in a little bit, and we're going up and back down. And I like using keeping the paper bigger while I'm doing the lines, just because you're not going to see where they go off once you cut it, and you don't have to worry so much about the edges. All right, let's see, just a couple more with this pen. I've done a beautiful one, I believe it's on my Instagram, with blues and greens with the buffalo check and the plaid. So you'll have to check that out to get a different sense of what it can do. So now we're going to bring it back, and this time I used Mossy Meadow in the card, but the Mossy Meadow on the pumpkin pie is pretty dark and it almost looks like early espresso, so I'm going to use the garden green, and this time I'm going to use the brush tip end. So ignoring that little piece right there, we're going to come in close on the other side of this column, and this time you just have to go up and down once. You don't have to go back and forth. So we're just going to, well, maybe that wasn't quite as dark as I wanted it to be, so maybe I do have to go down twice. Let's see if I'm a little bit slower, it comes out with the color I would like. All right. And you can see this doesn't take too long. You know, you do need to take a minute with it, but really it goes pretty quickly. Let's switch it this way. You can do it whatever way you want, but that's just the way I started. So, alrighty. And again, you can certainly use a ruler. I like using the blender box, and since we're using Blender for the rest of the project, why not? Whatever you have available. Okay, so there you go. The plaid is all done. Let me put that aside. But now we need to cut this piece to the size that we need it for our project. I'm just going to bring in my stamping trimmer. And we're going to cut this piece to 5 1/4 by 4 inches. So I'm going to start and just cut off this. I want to look and see where I made the mistake on this part. So we want to make sure that that part's cut off. There we go. And then bring it around to make sure we get to 4. Let's see. Let's do it this way and go back again. So I'm just lining up, you can't see the top, I'm sorry. So I'm just lining it up to the 4 inch after I've trimmed a couple times. Sorry, I can't fit that right in the frame. Oops, that popped out. My whole arm popped out. Let's just pop that back in. It's hard working at a small angle for the camera. There we go. All right, so that's that way. And now we need to get it to 5 1/4 rather. So I'm just going to trim off the side here, flip it back around to get to 5 1/4, and there's our background piece. So it doesn't take too long to do the plaid. And I think it looks much better once you get those ends trimmed off. You can see it just looks like almost like a piece of flannel. So now what we're going to do is we're going to come in with a piece of Very Vanilla, and we're going to do this piece here with the heat embossing. So I'm going to use my Versamark. But first, I always use my embossing buddy. It just helps take some of the static off the paper so that the embossing powder sticks to where you want it to go instead of all over your paper. I find it helps a great deal. Okay, so I inked that up with my Versamark. And then we're just going to stamp here in the middle of the paper. All right, you can't really see it because it really just kind of leaves a watermark. I don't know if it'll pick up on or not for you. And then I just have a piece of scrap paper right here. And I use these, this is just a piece of computer paper. I use them over and over. I just label them in the corner, which embossing powder they are, and I use them until they're ratty and get a new one. So I always use too much embossing powder, but that's okay because the extra just goes right back in to the jar. And so then you can see we have a beautiful image. Any extra embossing powder on the page, I just tip right back in. And then I'll cover that up because I will spill it. All right, so I'm just going to come in with my heat tool and heat this up. So it'll be noisy for a minute. And you can see, I don't know if you can hear me over this, but you can see as it starts to turn and get shiny. And there we go. So I've seen a lot of times people will take their heat tool and go back and forth and back and forth. I was taught to hold it in place, and it goes a lot faster because your heat is concentrated in one area. Again, however you do it, it's up to you. So now I'm going to come in and I'm going to color in this image. And I'm going to use ink from the lid, from the re-inkers, and I'm going to use a blender pen. So I'm going to start with the Cajun Craze. Just always make sure that I have the last color off, and I'm just going to go right around the edges a little bit where the lines are. There's no exact science to this, at least not for me. I'm not a great colorist. I basically just do what I like to do. All right, so then just to get the color off of your blending pen, you just gently rub it against your paper, your grid paper or whatever scrap paper you're working on, and then you, we're going to use the Cajun Craze again, so I'm going to leave that open, and then you just can move on to the next color. So we're going to come in, this is Pumpkin Pie, get a little bit on our brush, and just go right in, coloring the rest of the pumpkins. And I always go off just a little bit when I get the color, because you can come back and add color, but you really cannot take it away once it's on there. So as you can see, those are the pumpkins. Maybe just a little darker right here and here. All right. So there we go with the pumpkin pie. We're going to reuse this one too, so I'll leave that one open. So now I'm going to come in and I'm going to color the wagon, and I'm going to use the crumb cake. This is one of our new ink pads. And I'm going to just pick up some color here and gently, now I'm not using watercolor paper, which you certainly could. So you just have to go a little bit easier so you're not pulling too much on the paper and getting it too wet, and then it would start to pill on you a little bit. But so we're just going to color in the wagon here. It's hard to see a little bit with the glare from my light, but I think I got all the spots I wanted to get. That looks pretty good. So we're done with the crumb cake. And now we're going to come in with some early espresso. And oops, I'm not stamping. I need to ink up. This one I have a lot of ink in. And then, so I'm going to take some off on the paper, but so now I'm just going to come in and go over a little bit to make some of the spots darker where I want it to be darker, just to give it a little bit of a more authentic look. Some of the spots are harder to get into because of the embossing powder, but that's all right. Just do the best you can. I'm going to come through with this. And again, I just need to move the paper a little bit to make sure I'm not missing anything, since I can't see very well with the glare. We'll come in and do the leg on this cart. And then I think that's pretty good for the cart. So we're all set with that. Then I've got some basic gray. Just getting the ink off my blender pen. And there's a lot of ink in here. It's just in the edges. I'm just going to come through and gently do the wheel in the gray. All right. I think I got most of that. Let's just... Okay, and really that's all I've done for coloring for the actual image. Now what we're going to do is use our daubers to go around it. So I'm going to start with the Mossy Meadow, and this time I'm going to use my actual ink pad. I have a sponge dauber, and I keep all of mine labeled with the color so I can easily reuse them. They are washable if you prefer not to do that, but I just find it easier. So again, I've gotten some ink on the dauber. I've gone off a little bit just to make sure it's not too dark on my paper. And then I'm just going to go up and down in little motions all around. And again, if I need some more ink. And you can... let me grab a piece of scrap here. You can have a different look if you swirl it like this. That's not really what I was going for with this, but however you want to do it. And each project you might want a different look for. So I'm just coming around with the green. That's really all set. So now I'm going to do more like it's a sunset. So I'm going to come in with the pumpkin pie, again, off a little bit so it's not too dark. I can always go back and add. And just coming around a little bit with the pumpkin pie. And then lastly, I'm going to come in with a little bit more of Cajun Craze. Really wasn't much on there, just to give it a little more depth in the sky. And I'm not using a lot of Cajun Craze at all. So I think that's good, but the one thing I want to do is we are going to cut this out with our oval framelits. So I just want to put my framelit on before I cut, just to make sure I got all the spots I wanted it in before we cut it. And that looks pretty good to me. So I am just going to put that aside for a quick minute. And then... let's see, just closing these up because I'm notoriously known for dropping my project right in the ink pad and ruining it. So I have a piece of Very Vanilla here, and I have the Happy Thanksgiving. So I'm just going to ink this up in Early Espresso. Let me just line that up. Here we go. There we go. So let me put that over here so I don't get it on myself. All right. So all of our stamping is done. So now what we need to do is cut out with the Big Shot our image. And I already cut the background piece, and that's an Early Espresso, and I just used a scrap piece and the oval framelit for that. So we'll put that aside, and let me just grab the Big Shot. I'm not sure I'll be able to fit this in the frame, but we'll try for you. So I've got the magnetic, let's go this way. I've got the magnetic plate in, magnetic platform, and then one of my plates on here. And then we're just going to line that up, make sure it looks good. Put one on top. and send it right through the Big Shot. Sorry, it makes the camera jump a little bit on the table when I use the Big Shot. All right. So now I think we have all of our pieces. So now we can put our card together. So let me just get rid of the scrap piece there. So we're just going to take our foil, and here's some snail. And I find it when I'm putting snail on the foils, if you go a little bit slower, it works a little bit better. Just there's, see how that puckers like there a little bit? But if I go slower, I don't normally get that. So we're going to put this right on here. And really, if you wanted to cut a shape out of the middle of this, no one would ever know to use for another project. I just didn't take the time to do that today. We've got our plaid piece right here. So we're going to snail that on really quick. Alrighty, and then it's just nice and warm with the foil in the back. You barely see it. That's why I said you could always cut a piece out in the middle so that you're not wasting. So we're just going to adhere the stamped image onto the early espresso, and we're going to use some dimensionals to adhere it onto our project. There we go. Alrighty, those backings get everywhere, but all right, so we're going to place this towards the bottom, the center of the going horizontally, but the bottom part. And then what I did for some decorations is I took our leaf punch and I just did 2 punches in the Cajun Craze. Here's another one. And then I just did 1 punch with the sprig punch, from the holiday catalog in the Mossy Meadow. All right. So to put those on, I use glue dots and a paper piercer. Let's see what I've got here. Oh, I'll definitely use this. Whoops, sorry. I'll use this new tool we've got to pick them up. So you just pick the glue dot up, place it on your leaf, and then just kind of stick it in there, and I just press a little bit. So then the next piece I'm going to do is the Mossy Meadow, just to mix them up a little bit so they're not all... Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if you could see that in the frame. I'll try and do the next one a little bit higher up on the... So I'm just placing that right behind. And when you use the dimensionals, you've got the room to do it after. I find it easier to line it up if I'm doing it after, as opposed to putting it down and then trying to get it centered where I want it. So this way you can just stick them in. Since this is raised up, you can stick them in wherever you wanted. So then I've got a little bow that I made out of the copper trim that we've got here. And when I attach the bows, what I like to do is I like to take a glue dot and I just roll it with my fingernail till I've got a little piece like that, and then I just put it right on the back and then adhere it right like that. And that way you don't really see the glue dot. And then our last piece is our Happy Thanksgiving. We're just going to put a little snail on the back of that. And I just kind of tucked it in a little bit. There we go. And you are all set. So here's the original. Here's the one we made. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. And all my links will be down below if you're interested in purchasing any of the items. It will link to my blog or to my Stampin' Up store. So thank you so much. Let me know if you have any questions.